Thank you for listening to the Conform to Christ podcast, where we seek to engage the mind, affect the heart, and call people to follow Christ. My name is George Mays. With me is Jay Jones.
Good morning.
And we are back for Text Driven Tuesday. It's been a minute, Jay, since we've
missed last week.
We've missed the last 2 weeks.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, I was sick, and then you were sick.
Yeah. I guess it has been 2 weeks. All right.
Yeah,
what did we miss?
Well, let's see. You were sick. You got. You think you got the flu?
That's the best guess.
Some mystery.
Yeah, that's the best guess.
And then last week,
yeah, you.
I had a stomach bug.
I didn't realize it'd been 2 weeks.
Yeah.
What did we miss? We missed the Easter.
Missed Easter, and we missed the biblical theology of marriage.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yep.
Yeah.
So just go back and listen to those sermons.
Yeah.
Those sermons. But
yeah.
We're back, and I'm feeling pretty good. You feeling pretty good?
Mm-hmm.
I'm over here like cracking my back and my neck.
It's an eclipse today.
When we're recording, we've got an eclipse. We've got an eclipse coming
on Monday.
Yeah. It's supposed to be maximum at 1:45.
Yeah.
Is that right for us? Somewhere around there.
Just a little. You'd have to drive a little. I was gonna drive to it today, actually. Yeah, because I've never been in like 100%
total.
Where you can look at it without glasses with 100%, and it's dark for like 4 minutes.
Yeah.
But I'm not gonna be able to do that today.
Yeah.
So we'll have like 93%. You can't look at that. Don't look at that, George.
Well, I mean, you can.
Yeah, you can, and then you're gonna have a hole in your vision for the rest of your life. We're getting the word out too late.
That's right.
It'll be too late for some of you.
If you're listening to this now and you looked at the eclipse, maybe go to the eye doctor. I saw a meme. Says me looking at the eclipse without glasses so I can file disability on Tuesday.
Yeah. Well, it makes you wonder, right? Like the ancient people, do they just know not to look at it? How they had to figure it out the hard way.
My wife was telling me about some Facebook posts from like a vet clinic that was telling people not to bring their animals inside, so their animals didn't look at the.
I don't think they're going to. I don't think animals are going to do that. I really don't.
Like for thousands of years.
Yeah.
Like what are the animals out there looking at the sun? Like I think people are the only ones stupid enough to stare directly at the sun.
Yeah.
I don't think that our animals are going out doing that.
The eclipse doesn't actually magnify the light. I learned this. So what happens is when there's no eclipse, you'll glance at the sun and then you'll immediately look away because it's too bright. Right? So it doesn't have time to burn it. But when it's covered almost fully, it's dark enough to where you could actually look at it. Mm-hmm. But when you do that, you're actually letting in the same amount of light as like this naked sun for however long you look at it. And then it literally burns a hole in your. Yeah. It doesn't burn a hole; it releases a chemical, which then I guess you have like a hole in your vision. Like you look out and it's just forever. You can't see from that spot.
Wow!
So don't do it.
You remember when Trump did it?
What?
You remember when Trump looked up at the eclipse? Larry, you remember that? You don't remember that? Yeah, he was at the White House.
It was beautiful. It was beautiful. It was beautiful.
Yeah. Well, I've seen people go to different extremes. Like this is a sign of the end times,
right?
Even though total eclipses are not really that unusual.
No, they happen like I can't remember how often, but the reason we don't see them is most of them are over the ocean.
Yeah. But so when something happens in America, it's a sign.
Yeah, it's the end of the world.
But I've also seen people are like, this is just a mundane thing, and like it's just the moon covering the sun. And I think we would remember Psalm 19:1: "The heavens declare the glories of God, and the skies above declare His handiwork."
Yeah, we're going to talk about that Sunday a little bit. I'm going to talk about the eclipse.
Yeah,
okay.
You
know, it's the only place in the known universe that you can see one.
That's right.
I'm not just the Milky Way galaxy. Yeah. I'm talking the whole universe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everything is.
The one place where there are observers,
right,
in the whole universe that we know of, it's the only place an eclipse happens.
Right.
Must be pure coincidence. Must be.
Yeah.
So
All right. Well, we'll hold off on that until till next week then.
yeah, yeah.
All right. Well, we're back in Romans chapter 1. You decided to Lloyd Jones it.
Well, not quite,
Not
George,
quite
because he preached 3 sermons on this
on
text,
this.
and I just did 1.
Okay.
So, but I did just do 1 verse.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Those can be challenging.
yeah,
One verse.
1 verse.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those can be challenging, but it was a helpful verse, helpful sermon on a topic that we don't hear a lot of just in the kind of the evangelical world
Mm-hmm.
as a whole, especially
Yeah.
in America.
Yeah.
You were talking about the wrath of God.
Yeah. 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 And one verse this verse really sets the section up. So this is a new section in Romans in Paul's argument as he's laying forth the greatest gospel explanation ever given in history. 118 through 320 is a big section. And the first part of that, he's going to bring an indictment against all of the Gentiles. So all people, no matter where they ever lived on earth, ever, that's not a Jew, he's going to make this elaborate indictment. So it's like he's a courtroom prosecutor. He's going to indict all of the Gentiles. It's a long section, so I mean we'll be here for a couple of weeks just in this section on the Gentiles, and then he shifts in chapter 2 and immediately addresses the Jews who have God's special revelation and they have His law, and then he condemns them. He condemns all of them under the law, and it ends with that phrase there in 319, so that every mouth will be stopped and all men held accountable to God. So meaning, when he's done with this. Again, picture in your mind, you're being prosecuted. You're there in the courtroom. When the prosecutor's done, your legal defense literally doesn't have anything to say on your behalf.
Mm-hmm.
That's his whole goal, and it's a really big section of the book. Very important, obviously, if he takes this much time. And this one verse really encapsulates the whole section and sets the whole thing up.
Yeah. And it really gives us some insight into how we should present the gospel.
Yeah.
And we don't often do it
Mm-hmm.
this way. And you talked about you open the sermon with what's humanity's greatest problem?
Mm-hmm.
What's their greatest problem? And of course, you look at the way that the world,
Right.
the leaders are looking at the world and what they think are the biggest problems. I mean, the biggest one that we are hearing constantly is climate change.
Right.
Like climate change is that's the big thing.
Yeah.
And every time you see John Kerry, what's
Yeah.
he talking about? He's like the czar, isn't he? Isn't he like
Oh,
the
yeah,
czar
yeah,
of
yeah.
climate change?
Yeah.
I guess he's taken over for Al Gore.
Yeah.
Is he the new Al
He
Gore?
took the mantle.
Yeah.
And Greta Thunberg.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
How dare you?
Still in my childhood. We talk about they talk about pandemic, social and economic issues,
Population issues.
population. Yeah.
Yeah. Overpopulation, which is mind blowing, really, because anyone like that looks at it can realize the population collapse is going to be catastrophic.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to have enough people
Right.
to replace everybody.
Yeah.
That's going to be a big problem. So, but no, they don't want people.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, technology, unfair. So I pulled all these off of UN's website. Unrestricted and unfair development of technology, particular AI. So, and the interesting thing in this article I read is that it said that we know all of the greatest problems that face humanity, we can't seem to work together to solve any of them.
Yeah.
So
No kidding.
yeah, yeah. So, yeah.
But this passage presents what the actual real problem is.
Yeah.
Which is going to encapsulate all these other problems.
Right. Yeah.
And so we're looking at Romans chapter 1, verse 18.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to read it, I guess we can, and we can jump into talking about it.
All right. Let's read it. One verse. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. That's it. Simple verse.
And there's a logical flow to what Paul is doing in Romans. He's already set up this desire to proclaim the gospel. He's told the Romans, whom he's never visited before, he wants to visit them so that they can help him on his way to preach the gospel elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And he has this. He even says that he's indebted.
Mm-hmm.
He's like a debtor
Yep.
that has to go and proclaim the gospel. He has to preach the
Yeah.
gospel. And then in verses 16 and 17, he tells us why,
Mm-hmm.
and he presents the gospel.
Yeah.
For he's not ashamed of the gospel because
Mm-hmm.
it's the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, for the Jew
And
and also to the Greek.
Yeah.
For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith,
Yeah.
as it is written,
The
the
righteous
righteous shall
live
live by faith.
Yeah.
Right. And now the flow is, well, why is the gospel
Yeah.
so important? And he's going to follow the same structure of 16 and 17, talking about the Jews and the Gentiles. He's going to address both of them before he lumps them all together and shows them this is why we need the gospel, and it's because the wrath of God is being revealed.
Yeah. So it's a motivational factor. The 4 is explanatory for the wrath of God. It's such a tightly, well put together argument, really.
Yeah.
And then he launches into this whole, after he states this, for the wrath of God is revealed, this long indictment that makes it to where no one can escape. There's no escape from this argument.
Yeah.
Um,
And so you're giving us 3 truths concerning the wrath of God that should drive us to the gospel.
Mhm.
So, and that's the purpose of this. It's not just informational. It's meant to. And you were
Right.
constantly bringing us back to verses 16 and 17.
Uh-huh.
That's what this section is supposed to do. It really is filling this gap between 16 and 17, and going into 3, 20, 21,
Mhm.
and explaining the gospel in a fuller sense.
Exactly.
So this is meant to drive us. I like how you brought out that this is worldview shaping.
Should be.
Like we don't
Yeah.
hear about the wrath of God very often.
Right.
It's pretty foreign concept. The problems that people face are usually not spoken of in terms of the wrath of God, and so.
Yeah.
To bring this out to really explain verse 18 and the passage as a whole, it should shape how we're viewing all of reality.
Exactly. Yeah, you got it.
So let's just jump right in.
All right.
All right.
Let's do
So
it.
it's three truths about the wrath of God that should drive us back to the gospel.
Uh-huh.
Right. So the first one is that the wrath of God is serious,
Right.
and I think as we're reading this passage, we will see the serious tone
Mm-hmm.
of this passage.
Right.
Paul's not flippant about this.
Yeah.
But before we talk about the seriousness of the wrath of God, we have to talk about what is the wrath of God, because I think people can have all kinds of different definitions for it. They can have all kinds of different views of like that. I think even some Christians, but probably the unbelieving world, has like this view of Zeus on Mount Olympus with his lightning bolts, and he's just ready to smite you.
Uh-huh.
Or I mean, a lot of the kind of the evangeli type churches, they just dismiss the wrath of God, or they kind of lessen it to, well, God's like disappointed in you, or something like that. So what is the wrath of God?
So, the way to think about the wrath of God is to think about it, I think, in terms of God's being. But we can get into that, I guess. But first, so after scouring various texts on Romans and other theological books and systematic theologies, I think really the best way to understand it is in three, I don't want to call them steps, because they really all happen at the same time. But it's his displeasure or revulsion to sin. So revolting. Think about being revolted by something. We aren't easily revolted today. But God is revolted by sin, right? And then second, he's resistant to it. So he's resistant to every will or every person that is in sin and their will set against him. People don't think about themselves that way, but if you are a sinner, then God's will is opposed to yours. So he's revolted by sin. His will is opposed against it, but also he judicially acts against it. And all three of those are important. Because if you don't have all three, like if you skip part 3, then you have an unjust God. All right. If you skip number 1, then you have a God that isn't holy and isn't good. Actually, he's not a good God. God should be revolted by sin because he's pure goodness. God is love. So in many ways, wrath is a result of his being a God of love. And that may sound weird to people. And I just racked my brain, like what is revolting to us that would maybe help us to see how God feels about sin. And the only thing I could think of was crimes against children. I don't know how you thought about that illustration, but
I thought you were going to say climate change.
yeah, yeah. Maybe for those on the far left, we could say using plastic straws.
Yeah.
You know.
No, you're right. Even though there's hypocrisy in the world, because children are treated like a nuisance.
Uh-huh.
It's the hypocrisy of the world in that when a child is wanted, then a crime against the child is revolting. But if the child's not wanted, then
Right. Then no one cares.
yeah, no one cares.
Yeah, yeah. So I try to get people to picture in your mind, like the practice of human trafficking, and people are human trafficked all up 40, right,
Yeah.
right through here,
Mm-hmm.
and so children are sold into slavery and they're traded and exchanged like little children, and they're used like inanimate objects, and they're sexually abused, and then they're killed and thrown away like garbage. Like if that doesn't revolt you, then your heart is very dark.
Yeah.
It's very dark, right? So follow the process. Not only should it revolt you, but your will should be set against them, right? So if you were to see someone trying to take another child, you should oppose that with
Right.
everything that you have to stop it. And then the last process is judicial action against. And like something's gone wrong with you, if you don't want like them to be raided, like in Mexico by special forces guys, and then just completely obliterated, like taking no prisoners, like just completely eradicated off the face of the earth. That's justice for people that do crimes against children.
And we would say that that was good.
Yeah, we would all say that was good. And so because our consciences have been so influenced by the culture, nothing revolts us. I think that still revolts us. But we should understand that's how God feels about sin. And that is a result of his being good. Like his goodness is manifested in revulsion against sin, his will being set against it, and then him judicially acting against it justly.
I think the problem that we have is that in the illustration that you gave of trafficking humans, we like to put ourselves in the place of the good guys. Like the violence done against the traffickers for them is not good.
Right.
Like they're trying to avoid it, doing everything they can to avoid it, and when it happens, it's not good for them. It's good for the good guys, and in the story of our lives, we like to think that we're the good guys. We don't want to put ourselves in the spot of the traffickers.
Right.
But in light of God's holiness and his goodness, his righteousness, we are the bad guys. We're the ones who are doing these heinous things, and because we're doing them, we don't think of them as bad as they are.
Right.
And we try to avoid it, and we try to avoid the consequences of it. And when the consequences come on us, it's not good for us. But if we step back and we view everything as God is the hero of the story, God is the only one who's good, then his disposition towards our sin is an outworking of his goodness. And for him to enforce justice on sinners is good.
Right. Yeah. 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 And simultaneously in doing that with us, we really bring God down to our level where, like, think about things that just absolutely can't mix in the universe. Like this is like oil and water, right? God's holiness is not compatible on any level with
Right.
with human sin.
Right.
Right? It can't mix. It can't touch. Um, again, there's so many ways it's communicated in the Old Testament. Even in the temple and the layers of protection of
Right.
holiness that are there to communicate this idea. Um, if God were to just manifest Himself here on the earth, the whole earth would be incinerated by His holiness. And it's not like I don't even think it would be that God would be like, you know what, now everything will burn and everyone's going to burn. I think would just be a result of His presence, and our badness would just be eradicated by His goodness.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
If you got the cherubim or the seraphim who are covering themselves because of His holiness,
Yeah, they've
and
never sinned.
won't even look at Him,
They've
and they
never,
haven't sinned.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, for sinners to be in the presence of God is like Isaiah crying out, I'm coming undone. I'm literally being torn apart because
Right.
of God's holiness.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you're right. We bring God down to our level, and we don't think that we don't think His wrath is good because we're so accustomed to our culture that says, well, you can't judge other people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you, like you have to have empathy with other people and not go around making these kinds of statements about what's right and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You've got your truth, I've got my truth, but that's not the real world. that's not reality.
Yeah.
Reality is that God is the perfectly holy, just, righteous King, and anything that is in opposition to that holiness, that perfect will, is a violation.
Uh-huh.
It is sin, and for God to be good and just and holy, He has to have this. He has to have this negative disposition towards it,
Mm-hmm.
or He wouldn't be good.
Right.
And
Exactly.
if a
Yeah.
if a serial killer was brought to a judge, and the judge was like, well, he's basically good.
Yeah.
He just likes to put people in his refrigerator. Like that would be a terrible judge.
Right.
That would be a horrendous judge. And even the smallest sins are an affront to God's
Mm-hmm.
very character.
Right.
And for Him to be good, He can't just wink at it and ignore it.
Yeah.
I mean, he has to do something. He has to act against it.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's his wrath.
Yeah. And it's obviously a very serious section. I texted with you earlier in the week, and I was like, I'm just dumbfounded by the fact of how flippantly and lightly in the West, majority, I would say, in the vast majority of preachers will preach about any of this, or preach about the cross, even what Jesus did, why He had to die. It's always just so given so nonchalantly and unserious.
Well, I mean, we've shown clips. I was thinking about bringing clips in today. I was like, we don't need them. Like everyone's familiar with this. Did you see Michael Todd
I didn't.
doing his trampoline stuff
No.
a couple of weeks ago?
Uh-uh.
Yeah, they had a big trampoline set up in the I don't even want to call it a sanctuary, like their auditorium or whatever.
Right.
He's jumping on the trampoline, and I'll do something for you. He does like a backflip, and it's just so it's so unserious.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about the Super Bowl stuff and like these people coming out and punting a Bible and acting like it's a halftime show, and there's the video of the pastor riding on the wrecking ball, and I mean we could go on and on and on and on about how unserious. I mean, just Rick Warren coming out. I mean, you talked about the pastor coming out in like the Hawaiian shirts. And like it's unserious.
Yeah.
That it's you're already communicating. We were talking about this before we even started recording, that it's a cultural problem that people don't even understand how how they dress is communicating something
Right.
to other people about the seriousness of a subject. And so
Yeah.
if the pastor is coming out and he's wearing a Hawaiian shirt and shorts and flip flops, you're not going to expect him to look out at the congregation and say, "You are all under the wrath of God."
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I
And
mean,
even if he did, like,
substitute any other calling in life,
mhm.
right?
That was a great illustration of the doctor
Yeah.
giving a this negative prognosis.
Yeah. Yeah. Imagine, and I didn't even bring up like imagine if he's wearing what he's wearing.
Yeah.
Imagine you go to the doctor and you have cancer and you've got like 6 months to live.
Can he be bouncing in a bouncy house first?
Yeah. Yeah. He can if you want. You come in and he's got
if you've got a commercial with a doctor, you look at the like lawyer commercials.
Mhm.
Well, we don't see them very often because we don't watch like broadcast TV anymore. But I remember when I worked overnights at Target, trying to go to sleep during the day, I'd have the TV on, and you'd get like all the local commercials, and you'd have like, the ambulance chasers, right?
Yeah.
And they'd have like the most the cheesiest, corniest commercials, and you're like, why would it's like Better Call Saul? Like,
Right.
who's going to this guy?
Right. Exactly.
Because he doesn't have any seriousness.
Mhm.
Like, why are you going to the doctor who is in the bouncy house
Right.
and he's saying, "Come on down.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll check you out."
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, you're not going to that guy.
Imagine you go in and he's got on like a pool attire.
Yeah.
And he's joking, like he
Mhm.
comes in joking, and he's like, "Oh, and by the way, you've got 6 months to live."
Yeah, it comes in with the joke of the day.
Yeah. And as I say, but you know what? It's okay because you can take some aspirin.
Yeah.
Like you want him to come in. You want his demeanor to match the seriousness of the occasion,
Right.
and then to tell you the truth. Like you have serious cancer, you're going to die, and there is, however, this drug, experimental drug, and it's been shown, 90%, whatever. And we're talking about something much more serious than that, because we're talking about a people's eternal destinies.
Right.
Talk about the wrath of God, but the problem is people never talk about the wrath of God.
And so it seems like they're content with these pastors inviting people to come to church because we've got bouncy house.
Yeah, I mean, they'll say things like, "Come and reconnect with Jesus." Like before you're a Christian, you're not connected with Jesus in any way. You're a created being. That's it. That's where your connection ends. So you need to connect with Him. You don't need to reconnect. You need to connect. You're separated, alienated from God in your sin. You need to connect with Him. I heard another, and this, I did a survey of like Easter type sermons last week. Not good for my mental health. One was like, why, Jesus came to die for us, but why? Because of sin. Well, what is sin? And then proceeds to explain that as bad decision making. You've made bad decisions in your life.
Which is true.
Right.
But that's not the whole picture.
That's not even the root problem.
Right.
It's like going to the doctor, like you said, and you've got cancer, and he's like, "Well, I know you've got headaches, so take this medicine, your headaches will go away."
Yeah, it's the presenting problem is you're making bad decisions. But why are you making bad decisions?
Right.
Why does it seem like all of your decisions are bad?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just we've had decades and decades. I don't even know exactly when this all started, but of just complete lack of serious. It's no wonder like people don't take pastors seriously, right? It used to be in a town or a community, the like highly respected people would be like a judge or lawyer and doctors and pastors. Like pastors were like that.
Right.
We aren't even on the radar anymore,
No.
friend. Like it's not even a thing. And really, churches and pastors have done this. The culture did not do that to them. They did that. It's not something that a pastor wants to live for, to be like, you know what, I just can't wait to tell people about the wrath of God. But how can you really show people like the greatness of the gospel if you don't tell them about this first? Like they'll never see it. And in reality, if you think about this, no one really understands truly the wrath of God until after they're really converted.
Mm.
Like you can get it beforehand. I think you can understand it. But after you've been rescued from this, that's when you can look back and you can really see, and you can really comprehend and understand how great the cross is. Um, and so that's what this text is communicating. Something that's super serious, and you know it is because it's the first thing he talks about. It's a big section, and it's the very first thing he brings up. It's like a key motivational factor
Yeah.
in his whole life.
This is the reason why he is compelled to preach the gospel, is because the wrath of God is being revealed.
Yeah.
It's the big problem.
Mhm.
And the closer we are to the biblical text, we the closer we can get to understanding
Mhm.
the wrath of God, because there's plenty of illustrations of the wrath of God. I mean,
Oh yeah.
you brought up the garden. I mean, the wrath of God is in Adam and Eve being exiled. And
Yeah.
the curses are the wrath of God.
I mean, just think about it. How serious is God about sin? How much is he revolted? One sin,
Hmm.
you lose paradise,
Yeah.
and you plunge when the world's plunged into darkness.
Now, the unbelieving world is, they think that's ridiculous because
Right.
they don't understand the nature of God. They don't
Mhm.
understand, like, he just eaten one piece of fruit.
Right.
Like, what's the big deal?
Hmm.
Like, they're not understanding what's actually going on.
Right.
That this is Adam and Eve set in opposition to God.
Right.
It's not the fruit so much as it's their desire to be like God.
Uh huh.
They want to be like God apart from God.
Yes.
God's given them His revealed word,
Hmm.
and they say, we don't need God for that. We got fruit,
Right.
and we can have everything that God's promising without Him.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's been the root problem for humanity
Hmm.
uh, for millennia now.
Yeah, and you'll see as we get there later, everything that's promised to us in the gospel, the world wants to recreate
Mm.
apart from God,
Yeah,
and actually believes that they can do it. It's part of the suppression
yeah,
that we'll look at,
yeah.
and
But
then look at it again next week too.
we got the flood. God wiped out the world,
Right, right, yeah.
and we don't have like numbers. We don't know
No,
how
yeah,
many people this was,
it
what
was
the
a
world
lot.
was like. But
Yeah.
the world, save 8 people,
Hmm.
was completely wiped out.
Yeah, completely wiped out. People have brought that up before. They're like, "You mean like God killed everybody in the flood?" And I'm like, "I got news for you, buddy. God's killed everybody that's ever lived.
Yeah, that's right.
Everybody dies.
Hmm.
That's a result of the fall, the curse of the fall." And they're like, What do you mean?" It's because they think death is natural. We'll get into that
Yeah.
next point. But yeah, that should tell you this is like God is revolted by sin. There is no room for mixture, and he
Y-
judicially always acts against it.
Yeah, you didn't bring up, but when Uzzah touched the ark,
Yeah.
and the wrath of God struck him down right then,
Mm-hmm.
because he touched the ark.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, God's holiness is so infinitely beyond humanity that for him to put his hand on it um, was a violation of God's character. And I like what R.C. Sproul says
Yeah.
when he discusses that in the holiness of God. He said that Uzzah believed that his hand was cleaner than the mud on the ground.
Yeah. You did. Yeah. 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 It's interesting to try to put yourself in the shoes of like, what would a non-believer think about this stuff? Like, if you could approach God's holiness in your sin, you die. Well, they probably wouldn't have a problem with if aliens appeared and you touched an alien and you died. They'd go, "Oh, wow, they're a powerful being.
Uh-huh.
Powerful being. We can't touch them. We're
Yeah.
not. It's not compatible.
Yeah.
Something about them." And they would just be like, "Yeah, it makes total sense."
Mm,
But then when you say the ground of all being, right? God's not even in a category
yeah.
of anything in creation. You can't categorize God by being as we look at beings. He precedes all time and space. He is infinite being in himself. And we tell you, approach God in your sin, and his holiness will kill you. Oh my goodness, what an unloving being. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's completely, I mean, it's part of the
Right,
suppression of
yeah,
truth.
yeah. It just reveals our sinfulness.
Yeah. There's so many examples. I mean, you could just go through tons of them through the Old Testament. But it's over 200 times God's wrath is referenced in the Bible, which makes me think it's kind of a big deal. I don't know about you.
Yeah.
And 10 times in the book of
Are there
Romans.
different words for wrath? Because I know it's orgy
Hmm. Yeah, they're
in
different.
Greek.
They're different words. There's like a word grouping,
Yeah.
depending on like I think the action and what's going on. But the kind of the picture that is painted in the Old Testament is which is anthropomorphic in nature, meaning it's phrased in a human sense so that we can understand, is like the flaring of someone's nostrils. You've all seen someone get really mad, right?
Mhm.
Their nostrils start to flare out, like take in more oxygen, or like a huffing and puffing
Mhm.
coming from someone's nostrils.
Yeah.
That's the imagery that's given to us. It obviously communicates anger.
Yeah.
People say, "When God's angry." Well,
Yeah.
Psalm 7:11 says that God is angry every day. God is a just judge, a God who feels indignation every day. I believe is what it says.
You didn't read the rest of the verses.
Yeah,
I was looking at it. I was like, this communicates God's wrath.
yeah,
Yeah, God's a righteous judge and a God who feels indignation every day. If a man does not repent, God will whet his sword. He has bent and readied his bow. He has prepared for him his deadly weapons, making his arrows fiery shafts.
mm-hmm. Yeah,
Like that's the wrath of God. It's like he's a warrior,
mm-hmm.
and you're the target.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's not because God is being capricious or he's being just wishy washy. Like he's not. This is not just a whim. Like he's aiming at an enemy
mm-hmm.
who has violated the king's righteousness. Like
Yeah,
you're a traitor,
yeah,
and the king he's justly going to deal with you.
right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So obviously serious. So that's the first thing that I wanted to bring out is how profoundly serious that this topic is, and that we need to get it needs to match. You know, the Bible does speak of itself, God's word, as sweeter than honey. And I think that's where we like to camp out. But the God's word is also compared to a hammer that breaks rock into pieces. And a lot of people never get the hammer,
Yeah.
and so they never really can taste the honey. And this is one of those sections, which is the hammer.
Yeah.
It's meant to wake you up, to jolt you out of your slumber,
Mm-hmm.
to help you understand the true, like where you're really at.
Yeah.
Outside of Christ, of course. And this was all of us before we were Christians. There's not a single person that ever escapes it. Ephesians 2 calls us children of wrath, like the rest of mankind. That's everybody. And that's who we are outside of Christ. Very bad news.
Yeah.
But you got to get that before you can get good news.
Mm. All right. So the first truth is the wrath of God is serious, and that's what brings us back to the gospel. We need the gospel because the wrath of God is so serious.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the first four words in the verse, the wrath of God.
Right. Yeah.
All right. The second truth is the wrath of God is being revealed now.
Mm-hmm.
And I went back to the Greek, and the word revealed is the first word in the verse.
Mm-hmm.
It is revealed, the wrath of God.
Yeah.
So what does it mean? The wrath of God is present tense.
Yes, present
revealed
tense.
now.
Well, I think naturally, because of, I don't really know why, but we think of either the wrath of God of something that happened in the past. We can read about it in the Old Testament. People even say that. You'll hear people say, that's Old Testament.
Yeah, right.
You ever hear people say that phrase?
Yeah.
And usually by that they mean, somebody did something that they were angry and acted in an angry way. Or there's a coming day of judgment. There's a coming day of God's wrath where we know he's going to destroy everything by fire. right? He'll cleanse the universe by his righteous holy fire. And there's a coming day of judgment. But what this text really is telling us is that's happening now,
Mm.
all around us. The wrath of God is being revealed now. And it's really contrasted with what's revealed in 16 and 17. There, the righteousness of God is revealed now in the gospel, in Christ. And we may take that, Christ's righteousness, by faith, and we might live. But also something's being revealed now. That's the wrath of God.
Mm.
So both things are revealed now.
Yeah.
The wrath of God is revealed now. And so I think the natural question is how is it happening?
Right.
And so a good practice is just to stay, in a book of the Bible and kind of investigate and see, is this elaborated on? And if we kind of draw a circle, we start with a bullseye here in our text and work our way out. The first one we encounter, the wrath of God is revealed first in his letting loose of whatever he's doing to restrain the human evil in the world.
Right.
So God actively is opposed to human evil through various things, right? Through the police, right? The police restrain human evil. Like you're not going to see the police walking by and be like, you know what, I'm going to rob the store right now. But if you live in a society where there's no police, there's no one to act against it.
You might get that mindset in like San Francisco.
Right.
You might get that in San Francisco.
Now you got, yeah, exactly. Well, they had to cancel the police thing. A lot of these liberal cities, and they had to backtrack on that real quick because crime started skyrocketing in those cities.
Yeah.
And so, where God is restraining human evil in all kinds of various ways, and so the first thing we see here, and he really follows this downward spiral. That's what we're going to see in the rest of chapter 1, is that God lets loose restraint over human evil, and what happens is, now our hearts become dark, and that manifests in various ways. The first is idolatry, but then we see all kinds of lusts and passions of the flesh, and then we continue down through homosexuality, and then we get down to a debased mind where people can't even think correctly. And then the longest list, I think, ever in the entire New Testament of human sins and vices is found here, and he just rattles them off. And as you read this, the end of this argument, you have to say, this sounds exactly like America. This sounds like where I live.
Mm.
You know what I mean? It's wild. So the term is God gave them up. Some people have referred to this as God's passive wrath because he's not actually doing anything. What he's doing is removing himself.
Mm.
And when God removes himself and removes the restraint, what then flows from that is everything you see in the world. People doing terrible things to each other, human trafficking, war, meaningless wars, oftentimes completely meaningless wars, theft, adultery, children that are rebellious and disobedient to their parents, dishonoring their parents. Eventually gets down to inventors of evil, inventing new ways of doing evil. And though people know people that do these things should die, they not only do them, they give approval to those. So they're approving it. And so that's the first way that we see it. We look at society, we look at the world. What's wrong with the world? The first thing that I think we see, God's wrath is being revealed, and then he's just letting us go. He goes, okay, you don't want me. You think you can run the world? Let's see how you do. And we ruin everything. Like we wreck the world.
Yeah.
I don't know, anyone who has like a sober mind can look at the world and say, yeah, humans were doing a really good job of running this world.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and this is really relevant for our own culture because we look at, we fit the description of Romans 1 to a T, and we can think, well, if America keeps doing this, we're gonna be under the wrath of God.
Yeah, the eclipse tells us that.
That's right.
The wrath of God is coming.
That's right. But what Paul tells us is that you look around at America, and that is the evidence that we're already under the wrath of God, because this just complete insanity that we're seeing in regards to sexual immorality. Um, it's because God gives people up
Mm-hmm.
in His wrath. He does this 3 times. It says God gave them up,
Mm-hmm.
and at least 2 of them are dealing with sexual immorality, giving them up to the lust of their hearts.
Yeah.
And so our culture, our nation, is not going to experience the wrath of God. It already is experiencing the wrath of God
Mm-hmm.
now,
Yeah.
and the evidence is it's just wild depravity.
What's frightening to think about is in John chapter 3, um, God can leave you alone so much that your heart becomes so hardened and dark and darkened
Hmm.
that if He were to appear to you personally in human flesh, that you would reject Him.
You try to kill him.
Yeah. And this is what Jesus says in John 3:19.
Yeah.
This is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and people love darkness rather than light because their works were evil.
Hmm.
So that's a frightening thing. Like, don't give me over to myself. Don't show your wrath toward us, and that you would give us over to where our hearts would be so completely hardened that we wouldn't listen to the preaching of the gospel anymore. We wouldn't even listen to you if you came in human flesh.
Hmm.
But that's what has occurred in the world and in society.
That's reason for us to, as Christians, to recognize our complete dependence upon God, and to to flee to the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
Because if God gave us up, this would be us too.
Right.
The only reason that the world is not just completely insane is that God still restrains evil, and that's part of His patience as the
Mm-hmm.
gospel's going forth. But
Right.
as He gives people up, that's just an outpouring of His wrath.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Exactly. And you keep going out, you keep branching out in Romans, and you run into Romans 5, and the wrath of God is revealed in the second way it is in death. So Romans 5:12 says clearly that sin came into the world through one man, meaning Adam. We go back to what we already talked about, and that rebellion against God, that death was not part of God's creation. So I made the comment, and I believe it. Death is unnatural, and I think everyone knows this, even non-believers.
Mm-hmm.
Right? People die. Death is not natural. It's unnatural. It's why we mourn like we do when someone dies. This is not the way it was supposed to be. Death was not supposed to be in the world, but through the one man's sin, death came into the world and then spread to all men. And I think no one can dispute that. Everyone dies, and the reason given is because all men follow after Adam. Not only were we in Adam, we do the very same thing. And so we also die. Everyone. And death is unnatural. Death is a curse. That's how God's wrath is being revealed now. And it's being revealed every day. Every single day, people are dying all over the world. 150,000 people die a day, over 8,000 in America. And that's like 300 people an hour dying every hour. That's a lot of death. And it should be a reminder to us that this is God's wrath upon us. The wages of sin is death, and everyone is going to die. There's no escape from it. God's wrath has come on every person.
Mm. We try to get to suppressing the truth.
Yeah.
We try to suppress that. We desensitize ourselves to death.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we watch movies and TV shows, and how many deaths do you think that you've, like fake deaths, do you think that you've witnessed? We desensitize ourselves to it.
Mm-hmm.
So when it happens in real life, like,
right,
or we hide the fact of death behind like sterile hospital walls or nursing homes.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a book in my office called Remember Death, and one of the points that he makes is that people used to die in their homes.
Mm-hmm.
Like families used to gather around the bed of someone, and they were dying in like the next room. Like you're eating dinner and there's like grandma is dying. Now we push our elderly to a nursing home, and you don't have to see them die.
Mm-hmm.
You don't even have to go visit them.
Right.
Or we've got a hospital and people die in a hospital.
Yeah.
We hide it. We build walls so that we don't have to. We either desensitize ourselves or
And
we just
and
act like it's
and
not
then all,
happening.
and then often now we never even see them after they die. They're
Right.
just gone.
Yeah.
Right. They'll be cremated. There'll be no viewing.
Right.
There's no viewing. There's no casket at the front of the church where it's opened and people walk by and see. Some
Right.
people still do that today, but that's very rare.
Yeah.
Now, people don't want to. They don't want to do that. They don't want to see that.
Right.
So I mean, that's going to be mine. Like you're gonna see me. You know, that's going to be mandated. I'll probably have a sign in there and say like, "You're going to die too." You know, wages of sin is death.
Yeah.
But think about all that is lost in trying to
You
do
want
that.
us to stand you up outside the church like they would in the old west?
In the
You know,
old-
like,
yeah. If you, yeah, yeah, that could be good. Giving me ideas. Yeah. There's a lot of benefit to that because then it forces you to grapple with your own mortality and then the why of it, right? And the why, which then gives opportunity for the gospel. So hopefully that would happen at my funeral, that someone would be alive. Hopefully one of you guys will still be alive and there'll still be someone who can preach the gospel there. So that we should think about this when death occurs. It's not just a natural cycle of life that we're observing. We're observing God's judgment on sin. And that's the second way we see it. We keep going out in Romans, and the further out we go, we come to chapter 8. And then we see in Romans chapter 8, verses 18 through 32, that creation itself is also part of the wrath of God being revealed now. So in removing restraint, human hearts growing cold and hard and dark and acting in evil against each other, wrath of God is revealed. It's revealed in death, and it's also revealed in nature itself. So Romans chapter 8 says clearly that the creation is under a curse because of Adam's sin. And so it's eagerly waiting for a coming day. And that day that it's waiting for is when Christ returns and the dead in Christ rise. So the resurrection of the dead. And at the coming resurrection, the creation itself will be set free from bondage. It's pictured as being in birth pangs still, and it's anxiously waiting and groaning for its own redemption, that the creation itself will be redeemed.
Some big theology there.
Yeah.
That Adam sins and his connection with the universe as the vice regent of the world is that when he rebels, the whole creation falls into sin and corruption and death at the same time, which also connects to the second Adam, who in his finished work of redemption brings in a new creation that's redeemed through his work. So big picture theology here.
Yeah. So, whenever there's hurricanes that happen or tornadoes or, the universe is just a chaotic place, and the world is a dangerous place. And not just those things, but sickness and disease and cancer and all of these things that people would say are just natural. Really, they're an environment that's under a curse, and it's God's wrath being revealed in a cursed environment.
Now, I think it might be important for us to point out that what you're saying is not that an individual sin is what's causing a hurricane. Like our hero, Pat Robertson, said, what, of Katrina?
Yeah.
Was it Katrina that it was because of the sin of like New Orleans?
Yeah.
Like that's not what we're saying. We're saying that because of Adam's sin, because of his covenant breaking, the whole creation has fallen into chaos. And so sin in the big idea. Now individual sins can bring upon consequences, but not necessarily.
Right.
So someone didn't get cancer because of some
right.
particular sin.
You shouldn't think about that. Like that's word of faith stuff. Like you got cancer because you didn't have enough faith, or you were in sin, and God gave you cancer. You could become a Christian and live a good Christian life and always honor God and still get cancer.
Right.
And die suddenly. If you have a really bad kind,
because we're living in this fallen cursed world.
When a hailstorm comes in and absolutely obliterates all of our houses, all the Christians get it too,
Right.
as well as all of the non-Christians.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, we need to view it, like you said, in this big idea of a broken creation. God created everything, and He said it was very good. Sin came into the world, and now it's not what God made. It's like a spoiled version of what God made.
Mm-hmm.
The famous illustration is an apple. You look at an apple that has a worm in it and is rotten, and the reason you know that's bad is because you have the idea in your head of what an apple is supposed to be. You would never even know that's spoiled or rotten. Well, this is, like we said, big worldview shaping stuff. The Bible's story is that the creation was perfect, and there wasn't cancer, and there wasn't catastrophic storms that obliterated entire communities like in New Orleans. Um, but sin spoiled it. And so the wrath of God is revealed, his revulsion to sin, his active will against it, and his judicial acting against it is revealed in a creation. And it's really a grace. It's a grace of God. You think about it this way. How terrible would it be if the world fell into sin and we were just completely cut off from our Creator? And He let everything be perfect. The environment was perfect. No one ever got sick. There was no hostility in the world. And then you just died and you were eternally separated from your Creator forever.
Mm.
You just die and you go to hell.
Yeah.
So you had a good life, you die and go to hell for eternity. Mm. But all of these curses are meant to wake you up to this reality, right? To bring you, hopefully, to the gospel so that you can escape from this, and that so that you could then have eternal life. As it said, the righteous will live by faith, right? And that's not just living now, that's living eternally. And that's the goal. The goal of these, of the wrath of God being revealed, is meant to drive us back to the gospel so we could escape all of the wrath and then have eternal life.
We when we were talking with the kids after the church service, I asked them, "Can you think of fairy tales where the main character falls under a curse?" Are we going to hear the people working on the roof?
Some work. They're doing some work on the roof.
Yeah, if you hear knocking, that's not us. I asked them, can you think of fairy tales where the main character falls under a curse? And we talked about like Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, Beauty and the Beast, where who's the one that transgresses in Beauty and the Beast? It's the prince, and in his transgression, his entire house is cursed.
Yeah.
And then we talked about the fact that the hero has to come and set free these characters from the curse.
Yeah.
And how this is these little fairy tales are just shadows of the true story. We live in a cursed world, and the hero has to come and set us free from the effects of the curse. So you brought up, how does God's wrath revealed now relate to Christians? What does it look like that we live in this fallen world? We still experience death. We still are experiencing the effects of other people sinning against us, and we're part of a culture that is in that downward spiral because of God's wrath as he gives people over to their sin. So what is God's wrath? What's that mean for the Christian? Are we still under the wrath of God?
Right. And I guess this gets back to the absolute genius of this book, which is ultimately written by God through a man, right? I'm not going to give all props to the Apostle Paul for how tightly this argument flows and all the answers that are given, but the answer is given in Romans 8:28, that we don't just, God could save us and we could poof, just disappear. Like, bam, we're gone out of here.
Right.
My ticket is punched.
Yeah.
I escaped the wrath of God.
Popcorn raptures, right?
Really what it is the wrath of God then is transformed into something else for the Christian. So all of the things we listed, so whether it would be a hailstorm hits my house, it's major inconvenience, it costs me money, it costs all of this stuff, or I get sick, which we got sick the past couple of weeks, like real sick, or someone sins against you, causing you pain and even like maybe it could be psychological pain that lasts for decades. Is it meaningless? Is this some type of meaningless now suffering the Christian has to just endure? Well, no, God has transformed all of that and used it as a means that he uses to transform us into the image of Christ. Conform to Christ podcast, that's what it's all about, right? That's what our podcast is about.
I mean, you just blew everyone's mind, Jay.
Yeah. comes from Romans 8:28. Yeah. And we know for all those who love God, all things work together for good for those that are called to according to his purpose. And the good there is to be made into the image of his son.
Mhm.
So the illustration, of course, not. I don't even know where this illustration comes from, but it fits and it works. Is how you make a diamond is by time and pressure, and that's what a Christian is experiencing now in our life.
Right.
You can't be made into the image of Christ. A sinful being cannot be made into the image of Christ. It seems to me, or God would have done it a different way, without enduring pain and suffering over a period of time. And he then uses that. We know it's not meaningless. It's part of his goodness toward us, and that he then uses that which would be wrath for us for our own good. He transforms it into something good to make us like his son. That's the first way. But then death, if you think about death for a Christian, death is not anything to be feared. Never is a Christian told in the New Testament to fear death. If you're in Christ, death is nothing to you. Literally nothing. Think about in the grand scheme of eternity. We can't even fathom eternity. Eternity in paradise with God. Death is just like, a doorway, a gateway into another realm of existence. We, I think, are right to fear a little bit of death when we're young because I want to see my grandkids. I don't want to die young. So there's kind of that. I'm not afraid of it, though. Like, I'm not afraid personally for me. There are things I don't want to miss out on. But if you ever talk to an older person, like they're just ready to die.
I can't tell you. Our
You know what I mean?
our oldest church member is he's in his 80s, and he comes and talks to me pretty often. And I can't tell you how many times we've just very frankly talked about him dying and like planning his funeral and what does he want done at his funeral. And yeah, because he's not afraid to die. He knows that to be absent from this body is to be present with the Lord, and so he's ready.
Right. So yeah, so in Christ, he conquered death. The wages of sin is death, and so he took the death curse. So now death for us can't be a curse. There's got to be something else.
Yeah.
And it's a gateway into another reality for us, into a transformation, an amazing transformation that we can't even fathom. So Christ conquered death. He holds the keys of death and Hades. He's the master of it. And for all of his people that they die, we have the assurance that immediately upon death we get to be with him, and we'll be transformed at his coming, and we'll be resurrected from the dead and experience eternal life in a perfect creation. So even the curse of death for the Christian is transformed because of the gospel.
Yeah. So it just drives us back to the gospel. It's Christ prayed in the garden if there's any way for this cup to pass,
right?
But if not, let your will be done. And
Yeah.
he went to the cross because there was no other way.
And
If there was any other way for us to be conformed to the image of Christ, God would do that instead. And so whenever we're going through these trials and hardships and suffering and sorrows, we can know this is the way in which God is going to make us to be like Christ, and that should transform everything, and it should bring us some joy and some peace in the midst of suffering, knowing that if there was any other way, that God would do that instead of this. But there is no other way, and so this is the way in which we're going to be conformed to the image of Christ.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I always learn a lot when I'm really sick, like I was. I've only been really sick like that a couple times probably my whole life. But how it makes you to stop and to slow down and to think and to meditate, like about God, about the world, and then you get past it. It was tough to go through, but I mean, honestly, I feel like I'm better now spiritually than I was before. Maybe I was too busy thinking about things that weren't important before, but through that, I'm not saying it was fun by any means. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it again, but it was
somebody sneeze on Jay quick.
Yeah. There's definitely benefit to it, though. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, You just have to change your perspective.
Mhm.
So, I firmly believe in the sovereignty of God, and I wouldn't have gotten sick unless He wanted me to experience that.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
so
Okay.
there's got to be a reason for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So don't waste it.
Right. Right. So the wrath of God is serious. The wrath of God is being revealed now. And the third truth is that the wrath of God is against us.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just this kind of general ethereal thing. Like it's got an object.
Right.
Right.
And really, I wanted to use that word "us" to communicate the really the argument, to capture the argument here. Of course, we could easily go, well, I'm a Christian, that doesn't apply to me. But we need to understand us as humanity. Right? This is the universal condemnation. And this really comes in three phrases, which these themes will be kind of elaborated on through the letter. Ungodliness, unrighteousness, and suppression. So the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against something, someone. Well, who? Ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. So ungodliness, unrighteousness, suppression. And these really form an argument to which no one can escape. So the first word, ungodliness, is talking about sin against God. So think about everyone exists on two like planes of existence. You've got this vertical plane, which is you and God, and a horizontal plane, which is you and everyone else in the world, all other humans. Ungodliness communicates the idea of sin against God. It's really captured these two terms, ungodliness and righteousness, capture like the two tables of the law or the 10 Commandments. And the first part of those commandments have to do with God, our relationship with Him. And so there we have the first two is have no other gods and do not worship idols. And as Paul unpacks his argument, ungodliness really stands for failure to render to God, which is His due, which is worship and devotion and obedience. And we see as he unpacks in chapter 1, we don't do that at all. In fact, we know that truth and we suppress it and exchange it for something else. And we do worship other gods and we do fashion idols for ourselves. And so that's ungodliness. And that's all over the world. I mean, there are religions all over the world it's like spitting in the face of God. We in the West are, of course, we're too advanced to bow down to like carved images, right?
Of course we are, Jay.
But we're not so advanced that
Of course we are.
we won't be drawn into like worshiping crystals and stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
And
Your every piece of furniture in your living room is arranged so that you have a clear view
of TV.
of an object.
TV, yeah. And of course, there's even reemergence of the old gods in America. You know, they're trying to fill that void that secular humanism couldn't fill.
Yeah, the rise of paganism.
Yeah, the rise of paganism. But our main god in the West, in America at least, is really the self. The self is God, and we see this in identity. All of the things about identity, right,
Yeah.
that are going on all around us in the world today.
Right.
You are who you believe you to be, whether your biology matches it or not. Whether and people can't even question that. It's like everyone is in this illusion. It's like some dark magician like waved a scepter over America and put us into a spell.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll disbelieve what's right in front of our eyes because we create a God that matches ourself. And this occurs in the Christian church too, right? People can identify as a Christian and they refashion a Jesus who's after their own liking, right? Who's okay with them, being a terrible father, or abandoning their children, and moving across the United States, and then still like saying, that made me happy. I'm finally at peace, and I'm fulfilled, and me and God, we're good, right? Well, you just worship yourself, and you fashioned a God, and you fashioned a Jesus who's just okay with you, right? That's ungodliness.
Yeah.
That manifests in all kinds of ways.
Yeah, I mean, every problem that we have, every sin problem is a worship problem.
Yeah,
Every single one of them. Even those the pagans who worship, even if it's an idol. It's all about it really is about self because why does the God exist?
Mm-hmm.
Why are we worshiping this God so that we can get something
Right.
for ourselves? Yeah, everything, even in scientific, enlightened America, every sin problem is a worship problem. I mean, think about the most basic things that you struggle with: anger or impatience or selfishness or pride or whatever. It's all about worship. What am I going to worship?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the first ungodliness, um, and everyone has transgressed God in this way. So they really can't escape. But also unrighteousness. That's sins against humanity. That's what happens, right, when we fail to live with our Creator in the proper relationship. That then works itself out in sin against other humans. That's unrighteousness.
Mm.
So that's wicked and unjust acts against other humans. That's captured in the rest of the Ten Commandments. So murder, theft. Um, Probably not a lot of people have done that, but probably a lot of people have committed murder in their heart, as Jesus says. You know, um, it's a heart issue. Whether you have acted it out or not, you may have already committed murder in your heart towards someone. Um, Coveting. Everyone is coveted. Like, if you say you haven't, then you're a liar. There's just no way around it. Some people have coveted other people's spouses. And then, of course, you have acting out of that in adultery and lying and disobeying parents and dishonoring your parents. Every societal ill that we have is a result of unrighteousness.
Mm.
That's it. But that flows from downstream from ungodliness, and God's wrath is against that, which means His wrath is against everyone universally. Again, His goal is to condemn everyone. That's the whole purpose of this section. But then also there's the suppression of truth, which really is just another evidence, like it's more evidence. And so we'll really get into that next week because it's a removal. Like, so people could say, well, whoa, like I'm not that bad. I haven't really done that much stuff, like mainly good. Well, the suppression of truth reveals that you have, and you're trying to cover it up.
Mm-hmm.
So like you're trying to cover up a murder after the fact.
Yeah.
Right. And the suppression of truth. The best illustration I ever heard is like the beach ball illustration. Like, so pretend you're young again and you're at the pool and you've got your beach ball and you're hitting it back and forth. Everybody at one point has tried to push the beach ball under and hold it down or maybe even sit on it. You know what I mean? Well, it keeps trying to come up. It keeps trying to pop up out of the water. So this is what suppression is. It's pushing it down and you feel it trying to come up and you keep moving around to hold it under because you don't want it to come up, but you know it's there the whole time. But you've got to actively keep pushing it or it's going to pop up. And that's exactly what Paul says we do. We exchange the truth of God. We know the truth of God, every person, and we stuff it down under the water so that we can continue to live in unrighteousness and ungodliness. And God's wrath is revealed against that, and it shows us that no one is innocent of any of this, that willful suppression. And God's wrath is against it. It's against all of humanity outside of Christ.
And you brought up all these different ways in which we try to suppress the truth.
Yeah.
The different ways that we try to figure out, all right, what's wrong with the world?
Right.
Why are people acting this way?
Right.
I mean, we're living in a time in our country when people think that they can outlaw racism.
Right.
Like you're going to eventually be able to legislate it so no one is racist anymore. There's not going to be any problems, because they think that it's economics.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Economic factors. So everything in this kind of three we'll list here, I want you to think about the ways in which God's wrath has already being revealed, and what the Bible tells us. And this shows us more the suppression.
Mm-hmm.
So we hear people are evil and wicked because they have rebelled against their Creator. And the world will tell you, no, people are terrible, terrible and wicked because they don't have enough food and water, clean drinking water. So there's economic factors, or they're just uneducated. So if we could educate everyone, share all our resources equally, then people wouldn't do terrible things in the world. You can think of communism, like they have a utopia goal. Well, that
Right.
seems to be really that mindset. I'm not saying like in that form of what we have seen in history, but they have the same goals. We can create a utopia where no one does wicked things anymore,
Right.
and all we have to do is educate them and give them what they need to live.
And
That's suppression,
as politics.
right?
If we can somehow legislate our way to this utopia.
Right.
That's I mean, again, going back to communism and even socialism, it's the state is the savior,
Mm-hmm.
and if we give our resources to the state, then the state can
And if you give enough
usher us into paradise.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. You can't even, like you brought up San Francisco, you can't even have a walk down the sidewalk without seeing poop everywhere. But if we give you enough money, you'll change the environment.
Right. Yeah.
You can't even solve basic human problems.
I'm tracking with them, Jay.
You know what I mean? There are people and scientists think we'll even like terraform the earth and like control the weather and make this place a paradise. Like everything, again, because what's behind all of this is not just like nothing, all right? There is in the suppression and us being a children of wrath like the rest of mankind, there is another entity out there, which we didn't bring him up because he's not in the text, but all of the things that are offered in the gospel, the world thinks they can offer.
Mm.
So we'll suppress the truth and unrighteousness and say we can control the weather, we can solve all the human problems by education and science, and we can even solve death. Why do people die? They don't have to. We look at the human genome and we study our genetics and we say there's no reason, like, you know, when you're about 25, your cells are working pretty good. There's no reason that we couldn't like capture that forever, where our cells could just replicate forever. And they even have isolated the parts of our genetics that decay and shorten in old age.
Just put my brain in an android, Jay.
I told you,
Just
this is,
transfer.
it sounds science fiction, but it's not. Like
Mhm.
they really believe, like I told you, they study this planarian worm, which is like immortalized worm. It's a pretty interesting creature. You can like cut it in half or thirds and it'll just like regrow and it'll do it forever.
Yeah.
Like forever. And so they're like, let's splice worms into our body and our genetics and we'll study and we'll learn. We'll beat death. Death isn't a curse. It's just natural and we can defeat it through science.
Are we going to see the return of Ted Williams?
Maybe.
That's what I want to know.
They've been around long
Are they
enough.
gonna
They're going to have to, they apparently messed up his body, so they're going to have to like put him on a Terminator body. Give that man a bat. I want to see that. Give that android a bat.
Yeah.
See what he can do. I'd buy a ticket for that
Would you?
all day. Yeah. So yeah, we see that in the suppression. Everything we just talked about. The wrath of God is revealed now. The world says, nope. That's not it. It's the environment is harsh. We can change it. People die. We can change that. They won't even say evil. They'll just say do things that they shouldn't do, or whatever that means, right? We can change that through education, all that. So we see that suppression through all of that, through denying who God is, the truth of who he is, his eternal power and divine nature, but also in suppressing the truth of his wrath. So there's no excuse. Every mouth may be stopped. Yeah. That's 3 points. So, yeah. And
But when we
God's wrath is very serious.
But when we think about God's wrath, and you brought it up earlier, that there's people that are like, well, that's Old Testament. The God of the New Testament is love and
Right.
and acceptance and equality and all like hippie Jesus. Like
Right.
he's like the model liberal, right? he's
Yeah.
he's everything a Democrat wants.
Yeah.
But the wrath of God is
Except for when he starts telling people to flee from the wrath of God.
that's right. That's
Or calling them vipers.
But
and things.
we see the wrath of God more fully demonstrated in the New Testament than
Right.
even in the Old Testament.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and that's what I say for last. The greatest picture of the wrath of God. If you don't think God is wrathful, then I want you to explain to me the cross. Makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense. If God isn't wrathful, then what's the point of the cross? Could He not just forgive us another way? And so you have in the cross a bigger reveal, a great revelation. You really have two revelations happening. You have the Romans 16 and 17 revelation, the righteousness of God is revealed, the love of God being revealed, which people love to preach about that in the cross. I do too. But the cross is grotesque. It's the greatest picture of God's wrath ever displayed, far surpassing that of the flood. Um, just think about it in strictly human terms. There's yet to be a more horrific way to die than to be crucified on a Roman cross. Um, and he endured that. He experienced that physically. What you would see in a Roman execution um, would make you nauseous. I think if you were to see it, even in how desensitized we've become to violence and things that are gross, I think if you saw a Roman execution, you'd become physically ill. Jesus would have been whipped all over his body, front and back, down to the bone. His bones were probably exposed in his ribs and on his back. He would have been naked. We don't realize that. He's often pictured as being covered up. He'd been completely naked. This is a shaming, a public shaming. And then he would have slowly suffocated and suffocated to death until he died and bled out. And that's just the pure physical. You just look at the picture of that, and you should see God's revulsion to human sin. It's revolting. The cross is a revolting thing. It's a great mystery, right, that we wear crosses and it's so sanitized. Mm-hmm. But it was a grotesque and revolting thing to see, a picture of God's revulsion to sin. And then on top of that, just the pure human suffering, which many humans experienced under the Romans. He takes that cup, which the wrath of God is pictured also as a cup, and it's poured out upon him. So think about what we think about as hell for an eternity, right? We can't even grasp eternity. Our minds aren't even capable. Hell for eternity on a sinless person, on Jesus, not for one person, but for innumerable. We see in Revelation the number is innumerable. So in innumerable hells, the wrath of God poured out in a small amount of time. Cannot even be comprehended how terrible the wrath of God is in the cross. But that's all seen in the cross. It's pictured there, and it's meant as that, and we shouldn't sanitize that. There's never been a greater display of God's wrath, but there's also never been a greater display of the love of God than in the cross. So we can look to the cross and we can see the Romans 16 and 17, that the righteousness of God is revealed, and that this was done in God's love, that he sent his son out of his love for us, which should completely boggle the mind. And, I said, I don't know how many people were taken aback by it, but I've got a son. I wouldn't give him over for anybody. There's not a person. In fact, I'd probably take...
Stingy J.
I would probably do the opposite. If they're like, 500 people will die or give us your son, and I'd be like, yeah.
Take George.
Take him out. Take him out. You're not taking my son.
Yeah.
The exact opposite, right, occurs. Right. So how can we even fathom that type of love, that God would send forth his son to remove his wrath from us, to take it away, so that the instant, like, he's not even asking us to do all of these works and to do all this stuff. The second that you simply turn to Christ by faith alone, the wrath of God is gone.
And the person on the cross who's experiencing the wrath of God really it magnifies the only solution for the wrath of God. If it takes if anyone else could take the place of the Son of God, don't you think that the Father would have put him forward instead, like you said?
Right.
But it's only the Son of God who can drain the cup. It's only the Son who can propitiate or satisfy the wrath of God. There's no one else. And so any paltry ways in which we try to be made right with God outside of the cross is doomed to utter failure. It's laughable to think that we can do enough good works to satisfy the wrath of God against our sin.
Right.
You can't do enough charity. You can't give enough money.
Right.
There's nothing that you can do.
You can't make amends with
Yeah.
all the people you've wronged.
Yeah. And the cross tells us that because the Son of God was put forward as the sacrifice, this atoning sacrifice for sin,
Right.
to take the wrath of God. And the hero conquered.
Mm-hmm.
The wrath of God has been satisfied.
Right.
And we have the hope, we have the sure hope that the wrath of God against believers is no longer there,
Right.
because Christ didn't stay dead.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. He conquered death, as we talked about in Easter. You know, he plundered. He went into death and conquered it, and came out the other side. And only infinite, eternal being could survive the wrath of an eternal God,
Right.
infinite God.
Yeah.
So we should look at the cross and see how terrible, how awful is God's wrath, but how great is His mercy. So we see there His grace and His mercy and His love, His infinite love, which transcends any type of human love that we can ever know. And that's all revealed. It's a big reveal. So both things that are revealed, I just think it's so fascinating that the wrath of God is revealed, but the righteousness of God is revealed. They're both being revealed now, and they're revealed in Christ.
Yeah. And Romans 8:1, there is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ. We're not under the wrath of God anymore.
Yeah.
That's good news.
It is. Very good news. Yeah.
All right. Well, next week we will continue in this section. We'll be talking about general revelation.
Just talk
right?
about general revelation.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay. All right. Well, hopefully this has been beneficial. Thanks, Jay, for preaching this passage and reminding us of a difficult doctrine, but a necessary. I mean, it's absolutely essential for us to understand the gospel. We have to understand why we need the gospel in the first place. And so if this has been helpful, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Get the word out. Go back and listen to Jay's sermon from Sunday, and hopefully we'll see you, I don't know. We're gonna have a free for all?
Maybe.
I don't know. Maybe we can stay healthy enough to have a free for all. All right. Well, we'll see you next time. Have a great week. God bless.